Did you know that Scream is based on true life crimes? Yes, my friends, today we are discussing the Gainesville Ripper. Hey guys, what's up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, and today on Create Crime Time, we're going to be talking about the Gainesville Ripper, or as he's known as, is Daniel Harold Rolling. Now, Daniel Rolling was born on May 26th of 1954 in Shreveport, Louisiana. He was born to James Rolling, who was a police officer, and his mother, Claudia. Now, from a young age, Danny was told by his dad that he was unwanted from birth, and he was physically abused by his father. His mother and his brother Kevin didn't really think much as to what was happening to Danny, but eventually his mother would really then understand what was happening to him. There was a time where Claudia went to the hospital after she claimed that her husband wanted her to cut herself with a razor blade. She made several attempts to leave her husband, and repeated attempts, but she always returned back to him. I think it's mainly due to the fact that he is a police officer, so he's already protected. And if she leaves him, then obviously she has no protection because, he's a police officer, you know what I mean? So, as for the physical abuse that Danny went through, as an example, his father pinned him to the ground, then proceeded to handcuff him. He then had police officers take him away because he was embarrassed that Danny was his son. On another occasion, Danny had a dog, and his father beat the dog so badly that it fatally died in Danny's arms. When Danny was a teenager and a young adult, this is when he would be arrested several times for robberies in Georgia. He was also quite the peeping Tom, and he would be spying in windows and spying on women getting dressed. In his adult years, he tried to play his part in society and getting a job and trying to normalize himself. He was also in the U.S. Air Force as well. And there's one point in his adult life where he was working as a waiter at a restaurant called Pancho's in Shreveport. On November 4th of 1989, Danny was fired from his job at Pancho's, and he decides on this night that he's going to break into a home. This home happened to be the home of the Grissom family. He killed all three residents. So 24-year-old Julie Grissom, 8-year-old Sean, which is her nephew, and 55-year-old William Grissom, which is Sean's grandfather and Julie's dad. They were all attacked while they were getting ready for dinner. Julie was mutilated and cleaned with vinegar and posed on the bed with her legs spread wide open. Julie had bite marks on her body as well. Now, this triple homicide was solved in 2006, and this is when Danny took responsibility for the crimes in a handwritten confession. So it was unsolved from 1989 until 2006. So in May of 1990, this is when Danny tries to kill his father during a family argument, and he shoots his dad in the face. This results in his father losing an ear and an eye. Now, Danny had full intentions of killing his father during this attack. There's no doubt in my mind that he really wanted to kill him. So we're going to fast forward to August of 1990. This is when Danny decides to settle into a campsite that's in a wooded area behind the University of Florida. Specifically, apartments behind the University of Florida. So, Danny, in the early hours of August 24th of 1990, he brutally murders some college students. Now, the entire month of August, he brutally murders 5 college students during a burglary and robbery spree in Gainesville. These 5 students were all college students, 4 of them from the University of Florida and 1 from Santa Fe Community College. He mutilated their bodies, decapitated one of them, and then posed them using mirrors in some aspect. So he first slips into the apartment of Christina Powell, who is a 17-year-old freshman. She went by the nickname Christy. and her roommate, who's 18-year-old Sonia Larson. So he first sees Christina on the couch, but he decides to go to a bedroom first. This is when he goes upstairs and he attacks Sonia. He tapes her mouth shut and then stabs her to death. He then goes downstairs to Christina. This is when he proceeds to gag her, bind her wrists, cut her clothes off, and forces her onto the floor face down. He then proceeds to rape her and stabs her 5 times in the back, which causes her death. Both of the girls were posed in severely provocative ways. Now, on August 26th of 1990, Christina's parents went to the apartment because nobody had heard from either Sonia or Christina. Their phone hadn't been hitched up at this time. So, because they didn't get a response when they knocked on the door, they then got the maintenance guy. Now, the maintenance guy, he informed his manager about the parents being there. So the manager said, you need to have a police officer present in order to open the door and see where the girls are. So now that we have the maintenance guy, the manager, and the police officers there, they then proceed to break down the door. And as soon as they open the door, the maintenance guy goes upstairs and finds Sonia's body. He then runs down the stairs screaming, goes outside, and he vomits. The manager, she sees a young female on the bed in a bad position, and she just turns around and walks out. The cop then calls for backup. Christina was found in her room on the first floor, and Sonia was found on her waterbed in her room on the second floor. So on the next evening of August 25th, he breaks into the house of Krista Hoyt, and she is a Santa Fe Community College student that's 18 years old. He breaks into her apartment using a knife and a screwdriver. He had been peeking in her window just a few days prior, and he decided to break into the home when nobody was there. But instead of robbing and leaving, he waited for her. When she returned home, he then put her in a chokehold, and when she stopped fighting him, this is when he taped her mouth shut, taped her wrists together, and then put her face down on her bed. He then proceeded to not only rape her brutally, but to stab her in the back. And during the stabbing is when it ruptures her heart, and ultimately he decides on decapitating her. We'll kind of get into that later on into this. So after he poses her body, he then puts her head on a shelf in the room that faces her remains. Krista Hoyt was an aspiring police officer, and she actually worked at the Alachua County Sheriff's Office. And when she failed to show up that night at her work on the night of August 26th, the detective Hewitt that worked there with her, he dispatched 2 officers to her home, and that's when they discovered her body. So the next day, on August 27th, Danny breaks into the residence of 2 more Florida, University of Florida students. This is 23-year-old Manuel Taboda and his roommate and friend, 23-year-old Tracy Paulus. So Daniel was quick in killing Manuel after a struggle ensued, and he was killed by multiple stab wounds. Danny then proceeded to Tracy. He went to her room, in which he overpowered her and then followed his normal routine of taping, cutting, raping, and then killing her. Now, unlike Christina or Krista, Tracy was stabbed 3 times in the same position in her back. He then cleaned her body and posed her body in a provocative manner. Tracy and Manuel were found the next morning on August 28th of 1990. Tracy was found on the living room floor, and she was posed. And she had soap on her body, and specifically on her lower half, and there was tape residue on her body. So after they discovered these bodies, the police were hounded by parents after finding all of these dead students, and they wanted them to find the killer. So what the police noticed is that there was a pattern. The killer entered through a back door, and that each of the homes was near a wooded area. So this would help the killer be able to get in and out without being directly noticed, and had the ability to operate as well. So details like this became vital. And also this is when the cops realized that the day that of Krista Hoyt's murder, they responded to a burglary that happened about a half a mile away. Now, during this robbery, the teller had put a red dye pack in the bag of money, and later in the evening, an officer noticed a man walking into a wooded area. Now, the same police officer then tracked him to the campsite, which is the same campsite that Danny Rollin was using. And after tracking him to the campsite, he noticed that the man got away. Well, this is when the officer finds a screwdriver along with a bag full of money that had been defaced by a red dye bag and a cassette player that had a tape in it. So the cop collected all this evidence, but didn't necessarily connect the robbery to the murders because there was a gun found at the campsite and the murders didn't involve a gun. Well, but they also didn't listen to the tape. They didn't listen to the tape until a few months later. So when they finally listened to the tape, this is when the tape provides crucial evidence into finding out who the Gainesville Ripper was. Now the police, they believe that a man named Ed Humphrey is the one that is the Gainesville Ripper. Now, here's the issue. There was a blood type sample that was determined via a semen sample, and the killer had type B blood. Ed Humphrey had type A. So while Humphrey was still in custody, they discover another cold case, and that is the cold case from Shreveport. And there's shocking similarities between Shreveport and Gainesville. So the same manner of Julie's body mirrors the other females. So ultimately, they decide to test the samples and see if they are similar. And what they found is that the evidence matched each other. It was a similar match. So it wasn't long before a tip came in about Danny rolling to Crime Stoppers. And this is where it was told to the person on the other end of the phone that Danny was the son of a police officer, an aspiring country singer. He spent a few years in the Air Force before starting his career in crime. He was convicted of armed robberies in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and spent most of his time in jail in the 1980s. Danny also lived a half a mile away from William Grissom's house, too. So he was pretty close to the Grissom triple homicide. So when they were looking for Danny, what they didn't realize is that he was already detained in another jail. He was detained in the Marion County Jail, which is about 40 miles south of Gainesville. He was detained for another robbery that he committed 10 days after Tracy and Manuel's bodies were discovered. So on November 15th of 1991, he was officially charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder, and he was facing the death penalty. So before he could stand trial for the murders, unfortunately, he had to stand and face charges for his bank robbery, of which he was convicted on federal charges. So during this time, he was sent to Florida State Prison, and he met a fellow inmate, and this inmate's name was Bobby Lewis. Now, Bobby Lewis was already on death row for killing a drug dealer in the 70s. So Bobby went on to claim that Danny wanted to confess, and with this, Bobby went on to write a 5-page letter outlining details of the crimes that only the killer knew. And this letter, they wanted to confirm the details with Danny. But instead, what they had to do is they brought both of them in, and Lewis was kind of like acted as a mouthpiece for Danny. So during this interrogation, it's asked, they ask about everything that Lewis had talked about, and Danny then confirms and corroborates everything. And they would redirect to Danny and just make sure that is everything that Bobby Lewis said was correct, and Danny would affirm that, and all of this was caught on tape. There was also new details about the murders that came out during this. Danny revealed that he returned to the crime scene after he killed Krista because he thought he lost his wallet. And it was then that he decided to decapitate her. So he then took her head and put it on the shelf. He also talked about when he fought against Manuel and how Tracy heard the commotion. So when she came out after she heard the commotion, she saw Danny, and then she ran to her room and she tried to lock the door, but Danny was able to break down the door. And when he had her in his grasps, she said, "It's you, isn't it?" And he said, "Yes, it is." And this question is more or less in a correlation to who, like, you're the Gainesville Ripper, aren't you, basically. So Danny also went on to say that he had two different personalities. One was Yanad and one was Gemini. Gemini was the sinister of the two, but cops didn't believe in this, and neither did a forensic psychologist. So although they got him to confess to the Gainesville murders, they didn't get him to admit to the murders in Shreveport. Danny also stated that Ed Humphrey had nothing to do with this and that he acted alone. So they then released Ed Humphrey. So Danny would stand trial on February 15th of 1994, and this was almost 4 years after the murders. Ultimately, the jury found him guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to death via execution, via lethal injection. So shortly before his execution, he wrote his letter claiming responsibility for the triple homicide of the Grissom family, and he also included an apology in this letter. His last meal was a lobster tail, and he made no statement before he was officially executed. He died via lethal injection and was pronounced dead at 6:13 p.m. on October 25th of 2006. Now, if you didn't figure it out from the beginning of this, the Gainesville murders is what inspired Kevin Williamson to create Scream. And Scream is a fantastic franchise. And as sad as it may be, some of the worst things in life helps inspires others create something that others seem to enjoy, which sounds really messed up. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's true crime case. If you did, don't forget to hit that red subscribe button and turn your bell notification on to all. That way you know whenever I upload, and don't forget to hit that like button. It helps analytics. It helps get my videos out. It helps get more of you lovely people that enjoy these true crime cases as much as I do. So with that being said, I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys in tomorrow's video. Bye, guys.